Hello everybody, welcome back. In this video, we shall look at some ideas that you can use to make your shooting game more interesting and also earn bonus points. Now, shooting game is a very important landmark in our course because this is the first time we introduce students to the notion of cloning. Right now, cloning is a very important, very powerful feature of Scratch, which lets you build games that will otherwise be very, very hard. Right, so it's important to learn cloning well, and shooting game is your opportunity to do so. Right now, having said that, obviously there are ideas that you can do for bonus, and we'll discuss some of those here. But before that, as usual, I'll tell you a little bit about bonus. That bonus comes after basic. You always earn bonus. What you can do for bonus is almost endless. What earns bonus today may not earn bonus in future. Bonus is your opportunity to push yourself, try out new things, amaze everybody. However, remember rule number one, which is that bonus comes after basic. And as I already said, in this case, the basic really is about cloning. What are the blocks involved? How does it work? What do you do to make cloning effective? And so on is part of the basic. And you must make sure that you're quite familiar with that. And on that note, I also want to highlight that when it comes to cloning, the costume of the sprite also matters. So make sure it's nicely centered, it's nicely aligned so that the clones are appearing properly. Now, assuming you're through with all of that, here are some ideas that you could consider to earn bonus points. Right now, these are just some ideas. There must be many more possibilities anyway. Yeah. The first set of ideas revolves around the bullet and the player movement. Right. Remember, in our game in the class, the players moved on the edges, right, on the right and left edge. They went up and down, and the bullet was moving horizontally. Right now, you can exactly do a complement of this. Let's say, so players move horizontally. Now, players could be aeroplanes. Player could be two animals fighting. Players could be anything really, right? Or could be even the knight and the retro, right? Players move horizontally, but the bullets move vertically. Right now, this will require you to change the way clones behave once they are created, and so on and so forth, right? And hence that becomes a bonus point, right? On a similar note, you can use something called point in direction to the enemy, and that will make your game, very interesting, because rather than just shooting in a single direction, the bullet will actually go and trace the enemy and go in that direction. So which means the enemy has to be that much more watchful, right? And on the same note, I'm putting this game in the description here. There's also this possibility that players move in a much more involved trajectory. For example, players might move in a circular path, right? And you have to just turn and rotate and shoot, right? So there's a game we are putting in the description. You can look at that, right? Next, you can consider making armies of the enemy by cloning the enemy. Right now, what do I mean by this? Right? Remember, in the class game, there was only one enemy, which was the retro, and he was shooting these bullets, right? Now, so which means the bullet was being cloned. But you can do more than that. You can have the entire army getting created, which means you also create clones of the retro robot or whatever your enemy is, and then those enemies can even move towards the player, and that makes a nice game because that creates a sense of urgency. So player has to do something in a bounded time, right? So this is another interesting idea which makes your game quite interesting, and in fact there are many variants of this available on Scratch platform. Yeah. Then you can consider different types of bullets. Right now, what do I mean by this? Right, so really in our class, every bullet that the knight or the retro shot was same as each other, right? But that need not be the case. So you can possibly have, say, two or three kinds of bullets, and you can say some bullets go faster, some go slower, but some, when they go slower, they point in the direction, or they come out like very rapidly, right? Or some go fast, but they don't come out so frequently, and so on and so forth, right? And a very simple variation of this idea would be having limited number of bullets, right? Our game had no limitation; you could shoot as much, but then let's say you possibly have maybe, say, some number of bullets, and if they get over, then the player either has to do something to get a new bullet or is left without a bullet, right? So that's also interesting twist to the game, right? Next, you can consider adding some kind of obstacles that stop the bullets. Right now, so this basically the idea is that you put something in the middle of the two players, right? And you can then have, let's say, this obstacle either stops both the players' bullets, or even it's possible that it stops one player's bullets, right? So hence it changes the difficulty level of the game, right? So that's another simple idea, but it's quite powerful. Then you can look at something like additional sprites, right? Additional features. For example, you can think of doing something like an aiming sprite, right? So remember, in our case, the bullet's being shot horizontally and you don't really know where it's going to end up, right? But instead, if you could give, let's say, a aim, a kind of a marker where the bullet will end up. It actually will make the game interesting, also help the player, right? I'm putting an example in the description, you can take a look at that, right? And on similar note, you can consider adding some bonus sprites. Now what I mean by this really is to make elements of the catch game a part of a shooting game. So along with these bullets being fired here and there are also some, maybe some bonus things which give you, say, an extra bullet, or say gives more power to your bullet, or just gives you an extra point or an extra life, right? So that's another idea that you could look at. Finally, you can combine, right? You can really combine all of this and create different levels and different lives, right? So what it does is that it also lets you experiment, or let's say tinker around a lot with the broadcasting function, right? So really you can have possibly, first level where everything goes probably at the class level. Then you can have the second level maybe where there are more than one enemies, right? Then you can have a third level where there's also an obstacle, and so on and so forth, right? So students in the past have done such things. You can look at those ideas. We're also putting quite a few ideas this time in the description, so you can get ideas from there. But really there's a lot of things you can do also, because there are many games of this sort on the Scratch platform, right? However, just let's, before we wrap this up, let's look at this in context of the game that we had created, right? Recall the first thing that I said is that you can play with the way the players move, right? So here the players are moving vertically, but that need not be the case. Players could actually move horizontally and the bullets come up and down, right? Or players can even go around in circles, right? So maybe players are going in a circle and one guy is just rotating and shooting, right? That's also a nice idea. You can put the player in a corner possibly, and have, let's say, have him cover an entire range where this guy moves in a circle as well, right? So that's a nice little change you could do. Next, when it comes to the bullet movement, right, you could think of doing something called point and direction, right? Now, where do I find this point and direction? Well, basically, it's actually point towards, right? So you can say point towards, and you can use this particular, drop down to point the bullet towards the towards the knight, right? Or I think I should do this correctly. Yeah, you could point the bullet towards the knight or the retro, right? And where do you do that? Well, basically go to the retro code or to the knight code, basically retro bullet code or the knight bullet code, the bullet code, right? Here you can point the bullet, right, either here towards the other enemy, and that once you do that, so you just have to bring in, this particular block. And of course, there are certain precautions that must have to be taken once you do this, because now once you're pointing in a direction, you're predetermining which direction the bullet is going to go, right? So there are certain there's certain care that must be taken to do so, right? Next, I talked about creating armies of the enemy, right? Notice here there's only one retro robot which keeps shooting, right? But you could definitely create like an entire army, possibly say 5 of these, right? So clone retro robot as well, and then you're cloning each of their bullets, right? So that will make the game that much more interesting, because your fighter has to look at not just one but many, right? So that's another nice idea. And then these clones can even come charging towards the player. So maybe there are 5 of them, they are in this row and they are all coming at different speeds towards the, towards, let's say, the retro robot, towards the knight. And that makes a nice game as well, and knight has to shoot all of them, right? And to be able to survive, right? However, notice that whenever it comes to cloning, multiple sprites getting cloned, they're all having different behavior. That requires a lot of fairly careful coding, right? So if you're getting confused with that, I suggest you don't get into that path. It's possible, but it's something you can consider for the future, right? Next, you can consider a simpler idea possibly, which is that of a different types of bullets. So here my sprite, my knight and my retro have the same bullet. Basically all bullets behave the same, but possibly what you could do is that you can create some keys that, okay, look, when I press key number 1, possibly I get one kind of bullet, key number 2, I get another kind of bullet, and so on, right? So one bullet might move faster, one bullet might point towards the target, one bullet might do something, let's say, come out very frequently, like in a machine gun or something like that, right? So possibilities are there, right? You can also limit the number of bullets, right? Now that is interesting, because here there's no limit, there's only a time limit, but there's no limit to the number of bullets both of these can use, right? But you could possibly say that, okay, look, in this time you can only shoot, say, a total of 50 bullets or something like that, right? In which case you have to keep track of how many bullet clones have been created. Notice we create clones of the bullet by, let's say, pressing space bar. We do it here by pressing space bar, or in the case of retro, like every now and then we create, right? So you have to keep track of how many have been created, and accordingly keep a limit on how many can be created, right? And next I talked about creating some kind of obstacles. Well, the idea is very simple: create a new sprite which comes in between these, and it becomes like a shield for one of the two, right? So possibly when I shoot a bullet and the bullet goes and touches that sprite, it disappears, right? So which means it's become like an extra shield for the enemy, and the game has become harder, which means I have to dodge the not just the enemy's bullet, aim at the enemy, but also I have to find a way around this shield, right? So that becomes nice. And in fact, you can have levels created where you have only no obstacle in the beginning, then you have say one obstacles, then you have two obstacles, and so on and so forth, right? uh, Next I talked about some additional bonus features, right? So possibly you could have things like something maybe like a meteor or something flies across, and if I go and catch that, I get some extra power, right? So that becomes like an element of catch game into shooting, but it fits in quite nicely. Or you can also, like I said, look at the description. You can also help the knight by creating an aiming sprite, right? So I know where this bullet is going to end up if I shoot from here, because the retro is moving, so I have to have an idea of where I should shoot from, and sometimes it's not so easy. So the aiming sprite can help me aim there, right? Finally, like I said, all these ideas are just individual, but you can combine them all, make a multi-level shooting game with say different lives. So you can give say 3 lives to your shooter. So if you get hit 3 times, your game is out. But if you do not, then you can keep proceeding in the levels, and the difficulty level keeps increasing. Possibly the bullets are simple in the beginning, then there's an obstacle, then there are different kind of bullets, then this guy the enemy creates an army of itself, and so on and so forth. So very nice, very thorough game can be created from this, right? But again, the most important bit in all of this is that you enjoy the process, you try to focus on the basics, try to do in go in a step by step manner, logical manner, so that you understand what's going on, and that's when you will be the most creative. All right, take care, thank you very much, bye bye.